So still on the measures of economic development within an economy. So as I was saying earlier, we have economic growth and economic development. Economic growth simply means the quantity within the economy in terms of output is increasing, which is a measure of the GNI or the GDP. And when it comes to economic development, it simply means the quality of life within the economy is increasing. And increasing economic growth would as well lead to economic development. So education is also important. When it comes to measuring economic development, education is also important because it provides individuals with capabilities to make choices about their lives which matter to them. A rise in real GDP per capita is likely to lead to economic development because an increase in material living standard is one aspect of improving people's quality of life. So the first point mentioned here about economic development is the level of education. Education is linked to the quality of life an individual can have. So how is education important to the quality of life? How is education important to the quality of life?
Education allows you to um, um, get employed easier.
Education allows you to become employable, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so when you're employable, you have income,
Okay.
so you can afford the basic needs of life or basic necessities, and is um, that is a part of subjective happiness
Okay, subjective happiness. Okay. So basically, with education, people become more skilled, knowledgeable,
and
and
employable.
employable. And that would as well allow them to make the choice about their life on what they want to do. And it as well increases their income. So education is one aspect that would improve the quality of individual life. If you are educated, it allows you to earn more and increases your disposable income. However, if health and education outcomes such as life expectancy and literacy rates remain the same, the impact of economic growth on development will be limited. Do you get the point they're making here? They said, however, if health and education outcomes such as life expectancy and literacy rates remain the same, the impact of economic growth on development will be limited. So the point they're making is that, yeah, an increasing economic growth should automatically increase economic development. But if the outcome in education and health is not, it remains the same. Despite that the economy is growing, it simply means economic development will be limited. So they're trying to tell us that an economy can as well grow without having a positive impact on education and healthcare. And if that does not happen, it means there won't be economic development. Do you get the point I'm making here? So economic development is also concerned with how additional GDP is distributed. For example, if most of the growth in GDP is taken by the top 10% of the earners, economic growth is limited. If economic development is also concerned with how additional GDP is distributed. So we're talking about GDP per capita here. We're talking about how income is distributed among the people. So if only 10% of the population has the largest proportion of the GDP, it simply means economic growth is limited. Do you understand?
Mm.
So there's limitation to economic growth. If healthcare, education are not taken care of, there's limitation to economic growth. If the percentage of the GDP is only distributed among the 10% of the entire population. It simply means there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. So growth is also limited to those with that chunk of income. Do you get the second point there?
Mhm.
Countries are often classified as being at a low level of economic development, medium level of economic development, high level of economic development. Clearly, Clearly, a country with widespread absolute poverty and indicators such as death from malnutrition or easily preventable diseases will be at a low level of economic development because the measurement of well-being, quality of life, and living standards is complex. Economic development is measured based on a variety of indicators of development. However, GNI/GDP per capita, health and education indicators such as life expectancy or years in schooling are generally considered important in any measurement of economic development. To measure economic development, it is complex because there are different factors that you need to put into consideration. But irrespective of that, the factors that are important to consider when determining economic development are the GDP per capita, the level of the accessibility to education, the accessibility or the quality of healthcare, because these ones are real life events and we can easily, they are easily there for people to see. Because if the quality of healthcare of a country is if the quality of healthcare of a country is improving, it's expected that the life expectancy within that country would rise. If the level of education within an economy is improving, it simply means the disposable income is expected to rise. So if these two things are not happening, that means there's limits to the economic growth. I think it's clear.
Yeah.
So we have the classification of countries. What are the classification of countries? We are simply talking about how developed a country is, how less developed an economy is, or how emerging the economy is. Countries differ in their level of economic development. Economists, politicians, government agencies, and world organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the OECD classify countries and band them into groups for various purposes. An example of which is aid disbursements. Example of this classification include the following. We have high income, middle income, and low income countries. So one way to classify a country or an economy is to classify them based on high income countries, middle income, and low income countries. Now, I'm asking you this question. So based on your knowledge about high income, middle income, I think you know what high income means, middle income, and low income. Which will you classify Libya as?
Libya's upper middle income.
Not middle, upper middle income. Why is it upper middle income? Tell me how, why?
Because the data says so. The data here says so. Figure one says so.
Figure one says it. Let me see figure one. Okay. Okay, figure one. Let's look at the figure one. We have it here, figure one. We want to see where Libya belongs to in this situation. We have the world income as of 2017. We have low income, we have low middle income, upper middle income, high income. So why do you think Libya is upper middle income? Why?
Why? Because we have first of all, I would say because of the small population in relative to the
Population, yes,
Yeah.
okay. So first, we need to understand that upper middle income is between $4,000 to $12,000, right? So to get to know if Libya is within this range, upper middle income, we need to check the Libyan GDP with the Libyan population. So what's the Libyan GDP? Do you have the figure here, please? The Libyan GDP.
Libyan, 1 second.
The Libyan GDP. We need to know if Libya is between the upper middle income or lower middle income or low income or high income. So together we can only find it out using
It's
GDP per capita. What's the GDP of Libya?
48 billion.
48 billion.
Yes.
48 billion. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 48 billion. That's the GDP of Libya. Then divided by the population of Libya. What was the estimated population of Libya?
It's 7.4 million.
7.4 million, right? 7,400,000, right? 1, 2, 3. 7,400,000. So that's $6,486. $6,486. So he's right about that. Libya is between 4,036 to 12,475. So according to that data we have here, is an estimate anyway. So Libya is between the range of what upper middle income, because Libya is around 6,486, and that's between 4,000 to 12,000. So Libya is upper middle income. Is right about that. So we move on. So thank you for that information. So we know where Libya is. So to calculate, to know if an economy is between a middle income or upper income or low income, all we need to do is to divide the population with the GDP. And that is what we just did here. So we move on. So we can also classify a country. That's about income. We can also classify a country based on developed, developing, or less developed. So developed countries are high income countries such as the UK and the US. Developing or less developed countries are broadly middle income and low income countries. Low income countries are sometimes called least developed countries. So based on developed, developing, and less developed, where do we categorize Libya?
Developing.
Developing. Okay, so Libya is a developing economy. And why is Libya considered a developing economy?
Why is Libya a developing?
Economy, yeah.
Um, because of its
Reliance on importation
yeah.
or reliance
Okay,
on,
yeah. It's extremely dependent on oil.
okay, which is the primary sector of the economy.
Yeah,
Okay,
because oil accounts 95% of exports.
and how many percentage of Libyan revenue?
Yeah, 97% of government revenue.
Revenue,
Yeah.
oil, okay.
So it makes it vulnerable. So this makes the entire country budget hostage to global oil prices.
Okay, so it simply means, so based on what he's telling us here is that Libya account for its revenue through oil, and there could be external shocks, which
Yeah.
makes Libya to be vulnerable.
Just like the war in Iran right
The
now.
war in Iran.
However, I think it's a bit beneficial for Libya because oil
Prices are rising
yeah, and Libya is far from the conflict
zone. So which makes Libya more attractive to buy from at this point in time.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's expected that Libyan revenue will pump up.
Yeah. Also, there's another reason, which is political and
Interference,
yeah, and also political instability.
political instability. And how does political instability affect?
Well, first of all, you have divided fiscal policy. So since we have a fragmented institution, there's no unified national budget. So there's parallel spending and a lack of oversight.
And parallel spending means double spending. And that will as well become misallocation of resources.
Yep.
So Libya is considered a developing economy because it depends mostly on oil revenue. It has a parallel government, and when we talk about oil revenue, it's a sector of the economy which is it's the primary sector of the economy, and for countries to be considered emerging economies or developed economies, they would have the largest proportion of their revenue coming through from the secondary sector, the tertiary sector, or high tech of the sector. So that will make so for Libya to move from being developing economy to an emerging economy, or
there's a third reason, which is
a third reason.
Yeah.
Okay,
the bloated public sector and a weak private sector.
so a weak private sector,
Yeah, because over 50% of government expenditure.
employment,
Yeah.
about employment. Okay,
Yeah, so over 50% of government expenditure is spent on public sector salaries.
so the largest population of the economy
Yeah.
is significantly on the public sector.
Yeah, about 2 million.
2 million of the population,
Yeah,
and that accounts for
2
what
million.
percentage?
Yeah, so
Less than
of the
less than 20%.
no working population.
Oh, the working population. Okay,
Yeah, so working population is 5 million.
statistically,
Yeah, and
the public sector,
yeah, about
public sector employment
is 2 million. 2 million people work in the public.
around not 2 million, around 2 million.
Yeah, around 2 million.
Okay,
So it's 40% of the working population.
so which simply means Libya will still be considered as a developing economy because it does not have a strong private sector. Okay, so according to what we are talking about here, we can classify a country based on income, and we explain how income is being used. To use income, it's about the population divided by the GDP divided by the population. And we can also classify a country based on how developed the country is, how developing the country is, and how less developed the country is. And the case study here today is about Libya as an economy. Libya will be considered as a developing economy. And why is Libya considered a developing economy? Libya is considered a developing economy because its reliance is on the primary sector of the economy. So for a country to be called or considered an emerging economy, it would have, okay. So okay, we have high dependency. So I'm going to, there's a statistic here, but I'm going to read it through, but as soon as I finish what I'm saying. So for a country to be considered it, an emerging economy or a developed economy, for an emerging economy, it simply means the economy is moving towards, is moving towards the industrialization. It's already in industrialization and moving towards the industrialization, which is the secondary sector or the tertiary sector for a develop or for an emerging economy. And for a developed economy would really rely on tech and the service sector. That makes it a developed economy. So according to the data we have here, it said key public sector employment details in Libya. We have high dependency. Over 80% of the population holds a public sector contract, which simply means Libya has a strong public sector, and which makes the private sector weak. And a weak private sector simply means there's inefficiency. It simply means there's unemployed resources. It simply means Libya would not be able to, to think about the profit motives. There won't be profit motive. There won't be any incentive to want to grow the economy, because without the private sector, without having the strength, even if it is like 50%, it would really help the Libyan economy. But if Libya is having 80% of the population in the public sector, it simply shows that government expenditure will continue to rise over time, because government spending will continue to rise. If 80%, which simply means government would not be making taxes would not be enough for government revenue. So the reliance of government, the reliance of Libyan government will simply be on oil revenue, because the public sector, we know the public sector anyway, the public sector is always inefficient. And which simply means it is not expected that the public sector would be efficient to increase the output of the country. So female employment, we call this participation rate. The public sector employment rate of women is even higher, reaching approximately 93%. 93%, wow.
These are statistics by the World Bank.
Oh. Then the economic impact. This massive public sector reliance burdens the government with a significant proportion of the budget used for salaries rather than infrastructure development. Private sector constraints. The private sector is small, constrained by political instability. Is small, constrained by political instability, and faces challenges in recruiting, as many workers prefer the stability of government jobs. So now I'm going to go talk about economic impact, and the last one there, private sector constraints. If a country continues to rely on large chunk of its population in the public sector, it simply means there's weakness in the private sector. And the cause of the weakness is simply about political instability. No investor would want to invest in the private sector when it understands that the economy is not stable politically. So they might as well lose their money at any point in time. And for employees, and without the public sector, the private sector would also find it difficult to find workers, because lack of political stability simply means there's no job security. The private sector cannot guarantee. After the other, we'll continue. We just wait for the other to finish. Okay, we'll move on. So for the Libyan economy, we've talked about developing the economy. So before the stop previously, Libya as a country, the public sector continues to be the safe haven for employees, because with government, jobs are secured. There's stability in their workplace, there's stability in their work life, compared to the private sector. The private sector is weak. The private sector does not portray stability. The private sector does not portray job security. And because the private sector does not portray job security, it is difficult for employees to make themselves available for job. So they would prefer to work with the public sector because the public sector is the government sector and job security is secured. I think it's clear. So the constraint of the private sector is mostly on the instability within the economy, and that also brings it to the supply of labor, making it not, making themselves available because it's difficult. So everybody would want to choose the public sector ahead of the private sector. So that's about developing economies. Then we have the BRIC countries, where we have Brazil, India, Russia, and China. They are emerging economies. So when this term was first used in the early 2000s, it was judged that these countries were very large, but also had high growth prospects. As such, their growth would be very important for the whole world economy. So they are the BRICS nation because they have stability and they are emerging economies. They do more of exportation, and they are even part of the tertiary sector, like especially for India. India has, I think, the largest tech in the world. Is it? Am I right about that?
Mm.
Okay. Then we have the tiger economies. For the tiger economies, we're simply talking about economies with a very high growth rate, such as South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. For Taiwan and Hong Kong, they have their strength in the finance. With that in mind. So now we go to the characteristics of developing countries. Why do we call them developing countries? Remember, we said they are developing countries because they rely mostly on the primary sector of the economy. So let's look at what is being written here. Characteristics of developing countries. No two economies are the same. However, developing countries possesses certain characteristics when compared with developed countries. Understanding the characteristics of developing countries will help you to understand some of the measures of development. So we're going to start with the first one. So the first feature of a developing economy is lower per capita income. Now, when we talk about per capita income, we're simply talking about income divided by the number of population. So output per person measured in money terms and income received by citizens on average are lower than in developed countries. So a country will be considered a developing economy because it has a low per capita income compared to developed countries. I think the first point is clear.
Yeah.
2, physical capital. Developing countries have less physical capital per capita than developed countries. This means there is less infrastructure such as roads, offices, hospitals, and schools per capita. The quality and the quantity of machinery and equipment on average is low per capita. In the home, there is less access on average to safe drinking water or to sanitation facilities such as toilets. So a country will be considered developing economy if it lacks physical capital compared to developed countries or developed economies. And what are the physical capital we're talking about here? We're simply talking about road network, bridges, infrastructure, education, access to, a sanitized environment. So if a country does not have access to these things, it will be considered as a developing economy. The third characteristic or features of a developing economy is through human capital. And when we talk about human capital, it's simply about the quality of education and the skills that is available in such country. So here they wrote, developing countries on average have low levels of human capital. On average, the population is less well educated and skilled than in developed countries. In poor developing countries, for example, literacy rates might be high and might differ significantly between genders. So another factor that would allow us to know if a country is developing or developed or less developed is through human capital. So a country with a less human capital or a lower levels of human capital will simply be considered as a developing country. I think the point there is clear.
Yeah.
Health and mortality. Individuals in developing countries on average suffer poorer health and die younger than in developed countries. So health is greatly influenced by living conditions. In developing countries, individuals are less likely to have access to safe drinking water, while they are more likely to have no proper sanitation facilities, live in cramped conditions, not have enough to eat, and have limited access to medical facilities. However, there can be an enormous range of experiences within some developing countries. So a country can also be considered less developed if it has no access or little or no access, little or no access to safe drinking water. They live in a cramped environment. They don't have access to proper medical facility. So such country will be considered as a developing economy. Then we have population growth. When we talk about population growth, we're simply talking about We could talk about the age distribution. We could talk about increasing in population. So population growth tends to be linked to average incomes. The higher the average income, the lower the rate of population growth is likely to be. One reason is that in low-income countries, children can be put to work and bring income into the family. They can also look after the parents in old age. In developed countries, children are a major cost to parents, including lost earnings of the main child, carer in the family. So developing countries have large population, and they are developing countries because mostly the aging population would have to rely on the younger population for feeding and the rest. So this even cuts, the education level of children within that country. Then we have unemployment and underemployment. Another factor that can be considered when it comes to developing economies is unemployment and underemployment. So what's the difference between unemployment and underemployment? What's the difference between unemployment and underemployment?
Unemployment is not working at all, and underemployment is
Unemployment means not working at all.
yeah,
Really?
it's like
That's not unemployment. So if I choose not to work, I'm unemployed.
if you don't have a job, you're unemployed.
No, no. If I don't have a job, not having a job does not make you unemployed.
Unemployment and underemployment differences, right?
What is unemployment?
Unemployment is it's someone who doesn't have a job but is actively looking for one.
Is it the same as what you said earlier? Is that not having a job is unemployment? No. That's just a layman definition of unemployment, not an economist unemployment. Because you might deliberately not want to work. That's voluntary unemployment.
Yeah, and
So will you consider that as unemployment
well,
when you choose not to work?
no, that's free will.
So that's voluntary. So we won't consider that as unemployment as an economist. So unemployment is the inability of an individual to secure a job, despite the fact that he or she is looking for a job, actively looking for one. So unemployment means you cannot secure a job, despite the fact that you are actively looking for one. That is unemployment. Then what is underemployment?
Underemployment is it's people who have jobs, but their jobs don't fully utilize their experience or desired hours of work.
Yeah, time. So for underemployment, it's mostly about you having spare time and you not working, you not using your skills to work. That is underemployment. Okay. So they said less physical and human capital combined with high population growth can lead to large-scale unemployment and underemployment. So a country will also be considered as developing if there's large proportion of the population underemployed or unemployed. That is another factor of features that we can use to consider if a country is underemployed, is developing or not developing. Now, the structure of the economy. When we talk about the structure, what does that simply mean? He said, as economies develop, typically, they pass through the same restructuring of their economies. In less developed economies, the agricultural sector is large, while manufacturing is small. In middle-income countries, the agricultural sector has shrunk in relative size to be replaced by manufacturing. That is industrialization. In developed countries, the agricultural sector tends to be a very small part of the economy, while the service sector can be 70 to 80% of the GDP. So we can also use Ali. I see you square with okay, I see you too. So we can also use the structure of the sector of the economy to decide if an economy is considered a developed economy or a less developed economy or a developing economy. So when we talk about the sector, we talked about it earlier anyway. A developing economy will have its strengths. A less developed or a developing economy would have its strengths in the primary sector of the economy. A developed economy or an emerging economy would have its strengths in secondary sector of the economy or towards the tertiary sector. Then a developed economy would have its strength in technology and the service sector. So we see emerging economies as economies that are thinking about industrialization and tertiary sector. And what is industrialization? I said it earlier. What's industrialization?
It's industrialization is um it's like it's like when a economy it like goes from primary to secondary sector.
Thank you. So you got it. Let me help you out more. The transition between the primary sector to the secondary sector is considered as industrialization. So the meaning of industrialization is this. Industrialization simply means a situation whereby a non-industrialized economy becomes industrialized. So that means there's transition between moving from the primary sector to the secondary sector. And what is the secondary sector? The secondary sector is that sector that converts raw materials into finished goods. So that's about the structure of the economy. I'm going to repeat that. For the structure of the economy, we're simply talking about the sectors within the economy. We have the we have the primary sector, which is about extraction of raw materials. We have the secondary sector, which is about the conversion of raw materials into finished goods. And we have the tertiary sector, which is the service sector. So a country that is a developed country, developed countries like America, UK, Sweden, and the rest of them, they are Germany, Italy, they do more of service than industrialization. So another feature that we could use when comparing, when understanding if a country is developed, or less developed is institutional structure. Developed countries have a complex system of institutional structures. There's a good government, independent judges, a strong set of laws that protect private property and sophisticated financial systems. Institutional structures in developing countries tend to be weaker, and hence the rule of law is weaker. At worst, there can be civil war, which is highly destructive of both physical and human capital. Now, let's look at what we just said now. Institutional structure. Do you think one of the problems in Libya is institutional structure?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Are you sure, please? So do you think one of the problem in Libya is institutional structure?
Yeah.
Okay. How? Explain, please.
Because to have a good institutional structure, like developed economies, you have to have independent judges.
Independent judges. Do we have that in Libya?
No.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Strong sets
Are you
of
being frank here?
yes.
Okay.
Strong sets of laws that protect private property and the sophisticated financial
Rules of law.
Yep.
There are no rules of law
No, there's law, but it's not
applicable.
Depends on who's some people are above the law in Libya, unfortunately.
Then there's no rules of law, because rules of law simply means the supremacy of the law. That means the law is above everyone.
Yeah, no, there's some people that are above the law in Libya.
Really? Okay. Then we'll move on. What else makes you think that we have institutional problem in Libya?
Also because we had civil war, which is highly destructive of both physical and human capital.
Human capital. The case of KFC, that's a private sector business and it was destroyed because of war. So private sector businesses, they find it difficult to trust an economy that is lacking in institutional structure. Because without institutional structure, it is difficult for them to protect their property, to protect their finance. Is that it? So countries we would consider Libya as a developing economy because of lack of institutional structure, right? Okay. So that's about institutional structure. Institutional structure is simply about, mostly it's all about how property, how life, how finance is being protected. And to protect this, we need the rule of law. And when we talk about rule of law is simply about the supremacy of the law. And if there are no rules of law, or there are no rule of law, it becomes difficult for a country or an economy to thrive towards industrialization. And do you think institutional structure might also be an hindrance for FDI? So foreign direct investment would not want to come to Libya if Libya is not institutionalized.
Yep.
So the solution is that Libya as a country should be institutionalized. It should work on its institutional structure, but it's possible anyway. Anything can be possible, and it can always get better. So the last one we have here on features of what was it? Features of developing, less developed, and developed economy is the environment. A growing population together with growth of agriculture, mining, and manufacturing mean that the environment is under great pressure in developing countries than in developed countries. Why do you think the environment is under great pressure in developing countries compared to developed economies? Why? Why do you think so?
Mm,
That the environment is under great pressure in developing economies compared to developed economies. Why and how? Why and how?
One, how,
Yes. Why do you think
mm,
that environments are always under great pressure in developing countries compared to developed countries?
because there's often like mass migration of people from the countryside to
Mass migration, mass migration.
yeah,
Does that does that uh, hamper the environment?
because
Migration,
in rich developed countries there's sufficient income to protect the environment and make it cleaner.
mass migration. I'm not taking that. We
Mm,
need people in a country. We need people. People are resources,
yeah, yeah.
So it's not.
Um, Also in poorer countries, the environment is a much lower priority
Why?
because they have bigger fish to fry. So a lot more stuff to like bigger stuff to worry about.
Is that why the environment is under pressure?
Yep.
No.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay. Look at the first line here. Look at the first line. They said, a growing population together. Are you with me? A
Yeah.
growing population together with growth of agriculture, mining, and manufacturing mean that the environment is under great pressure in developing countries and in developed countries. Yeah, the population is growing, but the reliance of the population, because if a country is growing in population, it is on the government of that country to understand how the welfare of the people will be taken care of. So they would not care, especially developing countries that mostly rely on in the primary sector. The primary sector is about extraction of raw materials, right? So if extraction will bring about depleted resources, it will bring about pollution, it will bring about use up resources, like I said earlier. So these things put pressure on the environment. And the government doesn't have any other choice because that is their reliance. That is the only thing they rely on. So they would ignore the consequence of environmental damage. Do you get the point now?
Mhm.
The government would ignore the consequence of environmental damage to ensure that they are able to make revenue through extraction of raw materials. That is unsustainable development. Do you understand? So these are the factors that we put into consideration, or the features, characteristics of developing economies or less developed economies. So now we go to measures of economic development. Are you there?
Mhm.
For measures of economic development, one important advantage of using growth in GDP, GNI per capita as the indicator of development is that it is a single measure calculated using the same unit. So that unit is money, such as US dollars or pounds or euros. It is easy to compare the rate of growth of different countries using this figure because all countries follow the same methodology to calculate the GNI and the GDP. So one way to measure economic development within a country compared to other countries is using GDP or GNI per capita. Because when you use GDP or GNI per capita, it's the same in every country. Or the population divided by, or the GDP divided by the population, or the GNI divided by the population. That makes it easier. However, many economists have highlighted the limitations of this measure. For instance, that it merely looks at how much money a citizen earns on average, ignoring many aspects of development. It is not possible simply to equate GDP per capita with things such as access to mobile phones, energy consumptions, or the number of children in schooling using a monetary unit. However, it is possible to calculate an index where different statistics are given particular weightings. This is the type of calculation used, for example, for the producer price index or the consumer price index. There are a variety of development indices in use today. So let's look at using GNI and the drawback or the criticism about using GDP or GNI per capita. When we use GDP or GNI per capita to calculate an economic development, we quite forget that there are certain percentage of the people that have the largest income. So which simply means there's wealth and income inequality in a country. And because there's wealth and income inequality, using GDP per capita or GNI per capita to determine how much an individual earns or owes or own in a country is a fallacy. To get the drawback here, because yes, the GDP per capita gives us the total amount of money a country has, but it does not significantly tells us who owns what. Do you understand? So that's the drawback about using GDP per capita, and that's why they said it is preferable to use index such as the CPI, the PPI to calculate the UHDI to measure economic development. I think GDP per capita is clear there. Is it clear, please? Now we have Human Development Index. The United Nations calculates a measure of economic development called the HDI. This is a composite index based on 3 dimensions or components of development. The 3 dimensions of development are measured using 4 indicators. We have health, we have education, we have income as measured by real gross national income, GNI, and what else? I think that's all. We have health and education. We talked about education. The quality of life too is part of HDI. So using HDI, it simply means we're talking about other aspects of human development, which could be about healthcare, education, accessibility to sanitized environments, and the rest. We can as well use that to, to measure to measure economic development. So what are the advantages of using HDI? The first one, the Human Development Index gives a broader measure of economic development than national income statistics, such as GNI per capita. As the United Nations states, income is a means to human development and not the end. So the HDI measures 3 important dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life measured by life expectancy at birth, having knowledge measured by mean and expected years of schooling, and having a decent material standard of living measured by GNI per capita. So this means the HDI can provide a more accurate and comprehensive measurement than GNI per capita alone. So using HDI, it simply means we can as well understand the quality of life in a country, the life expectancy in the country, and at the same time, we know the income per capita in the country. So HDI is a better measurement or a better metric to use for economic development than GNI per capita. I think you get the point here.
Yeah.
It is also another point here that it is also recognized in the method of calculating the HDI that increases in income have a diminishing impact on living standards. For example, a rise in GNI per capita will have a greater impact on improving living standards in a country where the average income is only this, than in a country where average income is 5,000 to 50,000. So there's limitation also. If your income is increasing, it has a diminishing impact on living standards. And what does that simply mean? We already know that, if income of a country is increasing, it simply means the living standard in that country would also fall. If income level is increasing in that country, the living standard would also improve, because income is the reason why you consume. And the kind of consumption you have will determine if it's improving your living standard or not. So, the quality of your purchase, the quality of your consumption will be determined by how much more you earn. Do you get the point here? Using HDI values help policymakers to assess how well the economic growth is benefiting their citizens for this important dimension of human development. So for policymakers, there's statistics to use. So they can as well understand the impacts of their policy on citizens, measuring with life expectancy, measuring with the quality of accessibility to education, access to good road network, access to sanitized drinkable water or clean water, and the rest. So policymakers would know, it would give them the result of whatever they've been doing for the past years with their policy. The country now is ranked number 10 in HDI metrics. So that simply means, before now we were in 15, now we are in 10. That means there's improvement. So policymakers can measure their performance using HDI compared to using GNI. Do you understand? Another advantage about HDI is that it's well understood as a measure of development. Most policymakers understand that further data might also help them to measure development along with HDI. Yeah. Another advantage about HDI is that it's well understood. It's just about we understanding the quality of life now. Life expectancy is between 65 to 80 years in Libya. Okay, what does that mean compared to some previous years back? So it is there for everybody to see. So it simply means informed decisions are made, and it is clear for everyone to understand how these decisions are made. Those are the advantages of using HDI as a measure of economic development. But it has its own limitations too. So what are the limitations when we use HDI as a measure or as a metric for economic development? The HDI only uses 4 indicators to measure the 3 components of health, education, and income. This has its limitation. For example, in high-income countries, life expectancy at birth is relatively high. However, a growing proportion of the population have health problems, which prevent them from leading a normal life, and that reduces their life expectancy. And this is caused by, spending so much on maybe drugs. When you have high income, the kind of goods you buy, you might as well spend on demerit goods mostly. And when you spend mostly on demerit goods, it affects the health. So most developed countries might have health-related issues, and which simply means it is not expected that they fulfill the life expectancy aligned to them. So that's a limitation. I think it's clear. However, a growing proportion of the population we talked about that. So GNI takes no account of income inequalities. The Human Development Index also takes no account of a large number of other variables, such as the quality of housing, types of jobs, number of hours worked, and employment or the environment. So the problem about using Human Development Index is that it doesn't talk about the quality of housing. It only talks about how many people has a house or not, but it doesn't tell us where they live. It's about the quantity of house, not the quality of housing. But the quality of housing is also important because it talks about the quality of the environment you live. It doesn't talk about that. The types of job done by people, it doesn't talk about it. It only talks about the number of employed people. And it doesn't tell us, because whenever we talk about jobs, we need to put into consideration the quality of life. It's not only about what you consume. It's also about how much time do you have for yourself for leisure? Or is it about work? Do you have time for leisure? And if you don't have time for leisure, it simply means the quality of life can also be affected. Do you understand? So Human Development Index does not talk about the leisure time people need or have. Is it clear? So that takes us to, it's a long one anyway. I think we will round it up here anyway. So that takes us to, let's see where we can stop anyway. So that takes us to the inequality adjusted Human Development Index. This index is a modification of the Human Development HDI. It adds a 4th indicator of development, inequality. Each of the 3 measures of life expectancy, education, and achievement, and the standard of living are adjusted for degrees of inequality using the Atkinson index, a measure of inequality like the Gini coefficient. The greater the inequality in a country, the greater the negative impact on HDI score, which like the HDI goes from 0, least developed to one, most developed. Inequality reduces the potential for human development, and therefore higher inequality is considered to have a negative impact on economic development. Inequality HDI is a broader measure of development than the HDI but can also be criticized for not taking into account more variables that affect development. So the United Nations also publishes HDI data, which are adjusted for gender inequality. So putting inequality into HDI makes it more explainable and more, fair enough. So inequality is about the gap between the rich and the poor. So income inequality or wealth inequality, if it's being adjusted with HDI, it gives us a broader version or a better version of measuring the economic development. And it's also been adjusted with gender inequalities too. So when you talk about inequality, it's not just about income inequality, it's also about gender inequality. And what does gender inequality means, please?
Gender inequality means that based on your gender, you're getting treated a different way
Yeah, that means there's no equal treatment when it
between
comes
gender.
to access between the genders, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So that's part of IHDI. And that takes us to the percentage of adult male labor in agriculture. On this note, we end it for here today.
Mhm.
So in the next class, we're going to talk about the percentage of adult male labor in agriculture, which simply means the numbers of people in the primary sector. So let me stop the video first, please.